Hi, everyone, and welcome to On Our Days Off, where we are having conversations, making space, and figuring it out. I'm Jordana, and today we have a special guest, Miss Jenn Hudak. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. She has a Master of Science in Education and Family Counseling from Duquesne University, also LPC, Licensed Professional Counselor, and another lovely person from Alloy Center for Therapy. So,
That's right.
yes, we are making our way through the staff there.
I love it.
I saw on Alloy's page that you were pretty good with the kiddos. How did that come to be?
Well, I did my internship, and I also work at Center for Victims, which is a victim service agency in Western Pennsylvania. And that's where I first had my taste of working with the kids, if that makes sense. So they service anyone who's been the victim of some sort of trauma, generally violent trauma, but not always. And range from, I've had kids as young as 3, though I will say that's pretty difficult to do. Much more beyond play therapy there. And then clients the whole way up into their 70s. So broad range is where I got the exposure there.
Got it. What is play therapy?
So there's lots of different kinds of play therapy. So I'll just clarify that. And I am not a certified play therapist. So I also want to specify that, caveat that. But what I do is a couple of different types of play therapy. I do child-led play therapy, which is where we see children work things out through their play.
Okay.
And so we just follow them. And when I say follow them, they're techniques and interventions like we're tracking and we're reflecting. So we might say something like, oh, those two characters are fighting. And then you might say something like, oh, one is so mad at the other. And they'll correct you if you don't have it right. Let's be clear about that.
Okay.
But that's child-led play. And you can do all kinds of things with that. You can intervene, you can use it as coaching and teachable moments. You can just use it to validate that you're seeing what they're doing. So that's one aspect that I use. The other that I use with kiddos is I actually use it with adults too, is sand tray. And a sand tray is literally what it sounds like. It's a big tray of sand. And we use all kinds of miniatures to have the client create whatever prompt you give them. And that's a way, now with kids, I generally am not giving a prompt. A prompt might be like, show me your world. And so then they build you their world with little miniatures. So, but with kids, especially under the age of 10, I'm generally not giving a prompt. I'm just watching them play and observing and doing reflecting and tracking as we go. And you'd be surprised how much comes out just in that. It never continues to amaze me how much they process things.
What's probably one of your I don't want to say fondest memories, but what's probably a memory from session that really sticks with you from doing that?
I have one with a little boy that had been tortured for about 6 months by a parent's partner.
Okay.
And he had been habitually burned over and over in the same locations. And yeah, I should say like content warning.
No worries.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, that is heavy stuff.
So, and I believe that he used a particular character in that resonated with him in order to survive those experiences. So a cartoon character, and I don't want to say it just in case they're listening, but they used a particular cartoon character.
Okay.
And they would, so in the sand tray play, it would look like something like this character going through lots of things. So his house was, the cartoon character's house had fences everywhere. Like you couldn't even get to the house. It was boarded up so much. So like a need for protection.
Yeah.
There was a graveyard in the backyard. So, you know, and I don't assume to know the answers. I just look at what is in front of me.
Yeah.
And something there death related, right? Whether that's
Yeah.
confusion or concern or fear or whatever. And then the last piece was this particular cartoon character would get burned by, I have like miniatures include everything, like outdoor items, indoor items,
Okay.
people, animals, objects, like all kinds of things. And so there was like a little campfire, and the cartoon character would repeatedly get burned. And so part of what can happen with kids is they will have repetitive play. So they like try to get to a different conclusion, but the repetitive, like they may just keep repeating over and over and over. So session to session, I was seeing this.
Yeah.
And then I did an intervention, which is basically around like just questioning, like, what do you think this character would need? And I say in a much more kid-friendly terms than that, but
Right.
you know, oh no, what do you think so-and-so needs? And they're like, well, they need to go to the hospital. And I'm like, okay, well, let's go find a hospital. So then I'm engaged in the play then
Got it.
to help them try to come to resolution with what's happening. So I think that's one of the most powerful ones. That same client in pure play therapy we would play tea party, and this client would choose to play tea party because the client generally picks what they want to do with me. Now, sometimes I have directives, but most of the time not. And when we would play tea party, he would have the hot liquid and throw it in my face, like pretend liquid, right?
Right.
Pour the
Right.
tea and then throw it. And so then that was repetitive. And so then we would, you know, again, I would intervene and say, what do you think? You're like, oh no, that hurts me. What do we do? What do we do? And so then the client would repeat what he did in order to find like solace or comfort, or
Yeah.
guided me toward like, oh, you do this. You run around the room until it stops hurting. You pat it. You
Yeah.
take deep breaths. So it's pretty fascinating stuff, I will say.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And also it sounds tough because I don't think I could work with children in that way. It would be too tough. I don't have children. But I just can't imagine as a parent, but just as an individual, I just couldn't. I don't know if I could do that work with children. So thank you.
Sure. I think it's hard work. And I think all the folks that do it, that's why we're in therapy too, and why we
Yeah.
get supervision and all those things, because it's
Absolutely.
really important to, you know, try not to bring that home.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever, especially with the younger children, but just youth in general, whenever they're brought into therapy, er, you know, of course, I'm sure there's different circumstances, especially if you're working with children of abuse and violence, but instances where maybe parents bring their children into therapy, are parents ever, are they mostly like looking forward to their children going into therapy, or is there some also energy of like parents kind of feel embarrassed or feel like, man, they feel like they're lacking as a parent, like feeling of inadequacy?
I think it's all the above. I
Okay.
think it's a spectrum for
Yeah.
sure. So I think sometimes um, we see parents who desperately want to help their children and are at a loss at what to do. We see parents who desperately want to help their children, but are over involved in what's happening. We see parents who are not involved at all, who don't want to be part of the process. It's the whole gamut, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading, and it's talked about how since the pandemic started, which some may say that they feel that we're out of, but some people don't really feel we're out of it because they're still suffering the effects and the results of the pandemic on their personal life and, you know, professional life.
Sure.
But you also hear lots of things about the youth, how even the youth are saying that they are having increased feelings of anxiety and depression. And I think, in addition to like, parents losing their jobs, income being affected, children losing their parents, one or both, or children losing a guardian, in addition to like missing out on, milestones at school and prom and, things that children look forward to in their youth. What's something that we can say to the youth right now who are kind of still really haven't come out of this because they're still living through this because of what their parents have had to live through because of the pandemic?
It's a great question. Um, when I think about things and I think about families in general and clients, I really do try to look at it through a systems lens. And so I would want to definitely explore what's happening at home. So that's kind of the first thing that where I would be going is understanding what's going on, because kids are, we all affect, all the pieces of the puzzle affect one another.
Right.
And so it could, it could look like there's a lot of anxiety in the home because of COVID. It could look like a family who, has legitimate or not legitimate concerns about COVID. Like when I say not legitimate, I mean valid to them, but maybe overly anxious about things. Like I'm never going to let my kid go outside the house, right? It could
Right.
be problematic. And so I think I don't know that I would have one thing to say. It would be around exploration,
Got it.
around what's happening for that, for the kid or the teenager. And then depending on the age, we consider in the mental health world, we consider 14 and older is considered an adult.
Okay.
So parents do not need to consent for whether the child is in therapy or not.
Okay.
And
Wow, I didn't know
so,
that.
and so that's where I think a system lens under the age of that, but even over the age 14 and older, it's really important to get the family involved, because whatever is happening, it's not just with that kid.
Right.
And so I think if I had to sum it down into one thing I would say would be like, let's look at what's happening, not just with you, because
Right.
something greater is going on.
Yeah. You're kind of saying like I'm just trying to connect the dots with what you're saying and like in things that I've researched. So it's important to know what's going on with the parents because whenever I was researching and reading things, it talked about how children and youth view the world through the eyes of adults, or
Right.
they're looking to adults to help them interpret the world, should I
That's
say?
right. That's
Yeah.
right. Exactly. So
Okay.
if mom and dad are, you know, if they are, we can't go anywhere, we can't do anything, we are going to be in our homes 24/7. We can't even go outside to play. That's going to impact a kid. If it's, and even a teenager, if it's, well, you can't go to school because of COVID, XYZ. Now, I'm not saying that in the beginnings of COVID, that wasn't there. Of course, there are valid reasons for all choices at all times. But I think it's worth observing and the introspection with the
Right.
parents or parent to understand how and what is happening for them that could be contributing to the anxiety for their children.
Got it. That makes sense. What about um because I know at a certain point during the pandemic, like divorce rates were on the rise. I don't know how true that is anymore. Um, but I wanted to know what, besides the obvious and maybe not so obvious, but what is so difficult for children? What's some of the, I guess, the most common reasons children struggle with divorced parents?
Um, Well, I'll be honest, it's not my wheelhouse in terms of like working with kids that are typically going through, their parents are going through a divorce, but I
Okay,
certainly work with kids who are at, anything can be going on in their lives. So I think
got it.
with divorce though, I think about again, what's happening within the family system. So are there sides being taken? Is the child being used as a middle, as a um can't think of what that word is, like a are they stuck in the middle? In other words, are they
Got
being
it.
used as to either get reaction or receive information? Um, I also think just from a developmental standpoint, depending on where the child is developmentally and age wise, um, there are things that are really important for kids at different developmental stages, and stability is one of them. So, when we think about parents going through divorce, that's a very highly unstable time within a
Right.
child's life. And yeah, it's like a basic need, right? When we think about the triangle of needs. So stability and security and safety being, toward the bottom there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's kind of my thoughts on it. I mean, I'll give it more thought, but I think that's kind of where I land.
That's fine. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just made me wonder because lots of my like friends and colleagues, they're some of them actually, I know a few who have gone through divorce during the pandemic. And then it's just like that in addition to like trying to be a parent and then being a teacher because the schools were shut down. So they were just like stressed out. They're like, I am not a teacher. Like, and I can even say myself as a married individual, and even for people who aren't married, just couples, like it was a challenging time to be at home with your partner.
Sure.
Um,
24/7, no breaks.
yes,
Yep.
no breaks. Yeah, it's a challenging time. Fortunately for me and my husband, it brought us closer, but for some people, it made them realize they're like, oh, I don't really think I want to be with this person anymore. And it made it just tough for parents, I feel like too. It seems like some parents, it was brought to light, I think, some of the areas where parents like disagree on parenting on certain things.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect storm of a combination of like not being able to run away from your problems.
Yeah,
Whatever was already there was there.
exactly.
It just got highlighted
Right.
or the spotlight put on. And then I think you put especially the in 2020 when we didn't, different information's coming out every day
Right.
and we're pre-vaccine. I think that anxiety levels are high for everybody or most people in those situations. So
Right.
you have the uncertainty of what's happening in the world, what's happening with my job, happening with my, again, those needs, like my basic needs, food, shelter, right, income,
Exactly.
clothing, all those things um, really, really highlight and can escalate something that would normally not have been as difficult a conversation to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's great insight.
I want to go back to something you kind of touched on it before, but I just want to read something from your profile I saw.
Sure.
Um, and then I just would like for you to expand on it because I feel like this is very important. You have in your profile, it says, how will you know if I'm the right therapist for you? I think about clients as part of many systems, how you exist as part of your family, work, community, etc. How your race, gender, sexuality, age, size, religion, class, abilities, etc., are all part of your experiences. How privilege, equity, injustice, prejudice, and discrimination affect you. And I thought, yes, that is a those are very important points when you're, I think, just to have as a human being, but yes, even more so as a therapist. But I just want to know if you can expand on that.
Sure. I so I didn't start out a therapist. I've only been doing therapy for 4 or 5 years now, I think. And I've always been drawn to people. And ironically, a long portion of my career in life was in technology, which when I was in grad school, I had this aha moment that like I was still doing systems work, even though it was just bringing processes and people and technology together. But at the end of the day, it's how my brain just thinks about things, about all of the factors that go into something. And so it was a natural evolution for me to think systemically when it came to clients. So when I think about, I think Audra and I've talked about this a lot actually, in terms of it's hard for me not to see trauma when I see a client, like whether that's in private practice or in agency work. I just think trauma is, again, a spectrum, but at the end of the day, it's something that really impacted your client. And I don't think, for me anyway, I can't even begin to comprehend how one could not think about all the things that you listed out, because every single one of those things, whatever race, class, gender, sexuality, what ableism, like all of those things affect people. And for people that, so if I think about people that are in a privileged status, whether that's socioeconomically or race or gender or sexuality, whatever that looks like, things affect them too in ways that they don't even necessarily understand. And so for me, it's really important to be looking at all of the factors that someone has experienced in their life that could be contributing to what's happening with them in the here and now when I'm meeting with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine that helps you whenever, if this does happen, if clients come in and they're kind of resistant. I don't know if that's the right word, because I had mentioned this in actually our very first episode we did with Audra, and I was like, I don't know if I would see a therapist who's not Black, but more specifically a Black woman, just because of things that I have experienced in life as a Black person, as a woman, microaggressions at work, being followed around at stores. It's just like, I need to make sure I have someone who understands my walk in life.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fair.
So I'm like, I need to make sure I understand that. But then she had brought up, cultural competence, which we also speak of in healthcare. But I just think, even as a healthcare worker, I just think it would still be more difficult to sit and open up to someone emotionally when I'm expressing to them my walk through life. Like in the hospital, it's people generally give over their health history pretty easily. They're mostly honest about it. But I just think that would be harder to do sitting down with a therapist.
I think that's the job of the therapist, to make you more comfortable about that. And so one of the ways that I do that is we talk about it up front. We talk about, like, any of those subjects is not off the table. Like, I'm bringing into the room what sort of injustices, inequities would you face as a Black woman? What's it like to sit with me as a white woman? What are some of the differences and concerns that you may have about me not walking in those shoes, right? So I'm trying to bring that into the forefront early on in our therapy, that we're going to talk about these things, because part of what that demonstrates is my vulnerability to step into something that, I don't have answers for. I wish I did, but I don't. But what I do have is curiosity and understanding and empathy and cultural competency.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I don't mess up. I do, but I can be accountable for when I mess up, and I can move toward my client in acknowledging when I've messed up. And so that, I think, is my role. That's part of my role, is to help build the safety and trust with the client.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, I think that that's helpful to hear, to talk about how you remain curious.
Mhm.
I think that's a good quality to have. And I have to even make sure sometimes that I don't get in my own way too, because I know that there are other shoes that I don't walk in of other people. Um, you know, um, I think most recently, um, not most recently, but I think over these maybe past few years, not that this is a new issue, but I think walking through the world, heterosexual or cisgender,
Mhm.
I don't think I realized the privilege of that for a long time because I feel like that is a form of privilege,
Sure.
unfortunately. Um, so I just want to know, do you do a lot of work with, because I was reading your profile, do you do a lot of work with people from the LGBTQ community? Or do you
Sure.
have clients from that community?
Absolutely. Yep. I work with trans folks. I work with all different types of sexuality, whether that's, I mean, name a letter and I have clients there. So
Yeah, you cover all
yeah,
the
like
letters.
pansexual, polyamorous, like all of the things. So um yeah, and I think the other thing I would say is that I acknowledge, and I think it's important for therapists to acknowledge that I'm not going to understand it in the same way. And that doesn't mean that I can't help you process it. I can't help acknowledge and validate your experience, um, and offer perspective. So, yeah, I think I always look at the client as the expert of their life, and I'm bringing in um, different skills than they have. That's all.
Yeah. I like that. You said you can help the client process
Mhm.
what's going on, even though you might not understand.
That's right. And I can't fix, right? I can
Right.
acknowledge and talk about my own privilege. Because I am hard pressed to think of, I'm sure there are people out there that have zero privilege. I'm positive of it. But there
Yes.
is privilege in so many different facets and intersectionality that there's always privilege that we can be processing what's happening,
Yeah. Yeah.
or lack thereof, or lack of privilege, both.
Yes, or lack thereof. That's right. That's
Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah, it's interesting because like how you said, just because you are privileged, like you said, or lack thereof privilege, I think lots of times we still have things that still connect us, if that makes sense.
absolutely.
There's still things that connect us because I think lots of people feel like outsiders or feel awkward depending on where they're at. But I know for me, sometimes I'm just like, I just need to get out of my head. I'm like, probably everyone in this room feels awkward or out of place in some aspect.
Sure. And I
But
think differences are what bring us together,
yeah,
really.
yeah,
Because my goodness, I do not like why would I want to be around someone exactly like me? Like that, first of all, that's boring. Like
right.
if at base level, it's boring.
Yeah,
Secondly, like it makes my world, my life experience so much richer. And that's like at a personal level, but at a therapeutic level, it broadens my ability to be a better therapist, frankly,
yeah,
which in turn is about the client and being able to help my clients better.
totally. I have a question because and I don't even know if this is actually a clinical term. I was just like reading and like listening to things. And I was reading about um, conditioned compliance, which, like I said, I don't know if that's a real thing, but it was talking about how when children are young, like I know for me, I heard growing up, and I know I've definitely said this to my nieces and nephews like once or twice when I was like watching them when we were growing up, that parents will say, do what I do, or do what I say, not what I do. So just that important part of like being obedient as a child.
Mhm.
But the person who I was listening to was talking about how when you constantly tell children that they have to do something or be something or say something, you're teaching them conditioned compliance. And then when they grow up, they don't know that they can say no to things or that they can stand up for themselves. Um, so I just want to know if you can speak to that. And is that even a real term?
Um, I'm sure it's a real term in the behavioral world for sure.
Okay.
And I think absolutely it exists. And so when I think about a very easy example to think about is when we're children and our parents force us to hug or kiss our elders, right? We like
Yes.
go give Grammy a kiss before you leave. And it's
Yes.
like, and then if the kid's like, you know, like there are definitely kids who are like, I don't want that, or the aunt who squeezes your cheeks, right?
Right.
Whatever that looks like. And what we're teaching the kiddo there is that their feelings about it don't matter, that their instincts about what is good and what is not good for them don't matter.
Yeah.
An example that I use often with clients around, a mentor of mine taught me this, one of my supervisors, because I was like, oh, I'm totally stealing this because it works so well. Clients like understand it immediately, is like, and I don't like to think about the dichotomy of things in terms of like positioning good and bad. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm using this language simply for illustrative purposes. So I don't think this way, but when I put a but out there.
Okay.
So when we think about like if a kiddo has dropped their, like they're eating an ice cream cone and they're like, oh my gosh, they're enjoying their ice cream cone, and then suddenly they drop, the ice cream cone drops on the floor, like outside, they're getting ice cream on a nice summer day.
Right.
And when we think about like what does an unsympathetic or a bad, in quotes here, parent, what would like a bad parent say? Like what would a bad parent say to that? What would you say bad parents would do?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you. Like what would like a bad
Oh,
parent do?
what would a
We would,
bad parent say? I don't know. I get maybe they might just get mad that the kid dropped it. I don't know what they would say.
yeah,
They might
right.
get upset that they just dropped it.
Right. They might like be like, they might be mad, like, oh, you wasted that ice cream cone, or you cost me money, or
Right. Right.
you might call them names, like that's really awful, right? Like
Right.
it might be like, stop crying if they're crying, right? So like we can get our arms around what an unsympathetic parent might do. But when we
Right.
think about like, well, what would a quote unquote good parent do? Um, what are some things that we might do there, do you think?
Um, I think they would just say, it's okay. It happens. Don't worry. Like, it's not the end of the world. Well, we can get another ice cream cone. Like, we're,
Totally.
we're
Exactly.
okay. Yeah.
Right. Like it's okay. It's
Yeah.
no biggie. But both of those, I create the kid not being validated for what's happening in the moment.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yes, that is a great
So,
point.
so I think that when I think about condition compliance, that is like a more complex version of what that can look like
Right.
in terms of like what the kid needs in that moment is, oh, it's so upsetting. I know you're so upset about that ice cream cone, right? That's a bummer.
Yeah.
But that's, as parents, as human beings, we want to comfort, which there is a way we can do both, of course.
Okay.
But that's when you say condition compliance, that's one of those things that like we do it without even knowing we're doing it.
Without even knowing it. Yes. I would.
That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to come up with that response to either question, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But you are human, and side note,
Yeah.
that's what I as a mom would do too, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not what therapeutic Jen would do, but that's what mom would do. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Do your kids ever get, well, I don't know how old they are, but do your kids ever get on you like, mom, like you don't need to do the whole therapy thing right now. Like
Absolutely.
chill out.
Absolutely. I have a 10-year-old son, and he will say to me, and it's hard to separate, like especially as a newer clinician, it's I talk about it like the Matrix, like once you see things, like you can't unsee them. So like whether that's
Yeah.
racism, once you see it and you're like, oh, it's everywhere, I can't unsee this now, or
Right.
it's learning something about yourself or your family or whatever.
Right.
So integrating those parts into self without therapizing your friends and family is definitely something that is ongoing journey for me. But he will
Yeah.
absolutely be like, like especially when he was a little bit younger, when he was like 6 or 7, he would say to me, I don't want your good feelings right now. And he'll sometimes say to me, if I just ask him questions sometimes about like if he's bummed out about something or something's going on at school, and
Yeah.
I just ask him open-ended questions, he'll say, I don't want therapy, mom. I want mom, mom. And I'm like, well, honey, this is mom, mom. I'm just asking questions. So
Like,
yes,
I just asked you a question.
that's right. And he's like, but I don't like it when you do that. I just want you to listen to me. And I'm like, okay, I can totally do that. Like, he's one of my best teachers, honestly. Like, learn a
You
lot
know,
about yourself through your children for sure.
that's what I hear. I hear that, I feel like, from every parent. Yeah. It
Mhm.
seems true if all of you are saying it.
Well, they're little mirrors, basically. Like
Yeah.
you can't get away with the things that you do when your children reflect them back to you. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind. Should I move on with the adventure of parenthood one day?
Fair.
I wanted to ask you though, because we did an episode recently, just talking about how Black men, Black youth specifically, are committing suicide, and the rates at which they are committing suicide, they're rising faster than any other ethnicity right now. And on
Mhm.
a few of the articles I read, some of them, the parents had stated there were no signs that anything seemed off. Um, so, and I think probably most parents, most good parents, parents who care about their children, they probably do notice when things are off. I don't think that you're a bad parent if you don't notice it. Um,
Sure.
that's not what I'm saying, but what are some signs to know if something is off with your child? Or maybe just questions you should ask, you can ask just to kind of check in on your kids without, like, not freaking them out, but making them have the response maybe that your son has sometimes when you're just asking him questions. What are things that we can look out for just as guardians, parents, people who are just concerned about the youth?
I think any change in behavior is going to be an indicator. So whether that somebody's, normally outgoing and they're not any longer, withdrawal, like withdrawing from people, isolation.
Yeah.
Um, but I think for me anyway, what I encourage parents to do is talk about it overtly, like talking about suicide should not be something that's off the table when we're raising youth in our country, because it's part of their world. And I think parents are so scared that if they talk about it, then they'll plant the seed. Or the
Right.
reality is kids are already seeing it, they're hearing it, they're getting it. And so when we can, as parents, talk about the taboo thing or the scary thing, there can be, I'm not saying it always solves the problem, it does not for sure, but it at least begins to open up the door for the conversation to happen. Like, and I think, if we think about an example of like talking about sex with our parents, like that's one that everyone can at least kind of get their arms around, right?
Right.
Like, what does that look like? And so maybe with suicide, not everybody can like conceptualize what that would look like. But if we start talking about sex in an age appropriate way with our children when they're young, then it it does not become this like, first of all, my parents didn't even talk to me about sex. Like, I'm not sure what your parents did, but my parents did not.
My parents, I remember my mom talking with me specifically about reporting to her if anyone ever touched me inappropriately. I don't know. I don't recall like a sex talk, but I remember specifically my mom talking to me about if someone touches you here, make sure you like come tell me and your dad.
Yeah.
So I feel
Okay.
like that's really the only talk I remember, honestly.
Right. And I think most people are in that boat. I think that is the quote unquote the norm, right? The what
Right.
most people do. And so, however, if we can, as parents, be the person to bring it into the room, like our kids know what's off topic and what isn't. Why don't we talk about sex with our parents? Because they were uncomfortable talking about it in the first place.
Yes.
Right. So we don't
Yeah.
talk about it. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, I can't do that. That's a weird thing. That's a taboo subject. And
Right.
so I'm not saying I want to know. I mean, my child's 10. I'm not saying I want to know the ins and outs of the sex life when he's
Right.
older. But I do think that, every time he goes somewhere, I'm like, what do? We keep our hands to ourselves. What do we, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't touch other people's private parts every
Right.
time, not just once. And I'm
Right.
not trying to be like pounded into his head, but what I am trying to do is normalize it, that we
Right.
can talk about this thing and this is not an abnormal thing to talk about.
Yeah.
That, and so to me, suicide's just another subject. That's all it is. It's whether it's sex or gender or sexuality. I remember, again, new mom and I mean, not so much new anymore, but when I was in grad school, I was a newer mom
Yeah.
and a learning to be a therapist. And I remember taking my son to kindergarten one morning and talking to him about his gender and trying to understand like what he felt like, because I had always referred to him as a boy because that was his assigned sex at birth. And, again, when we know better, we do better.
Right.
And so, just exploring with him, like, and he, I think, thought I was insane, but you know what? He's like, Mommy, I am a boy. And I was like, but do you feel like a boy? And he was like, I think so. And I was like, okay, but if you ever didn't, you could always talk to mom and dad about that. And we
Yeah.
could, and then we continue the conversation. We read books about non-binary and all types of gender, all types of sexuality. There's no topic. We talk race, we talk about his privilege, right? So we do all these things so that there's no topic, including suicide, that's off topic. Now, am I talking about suicide yet? Kind of. He knows what the word is, he's heard it,
Got it.
and he talks about it, and he understands what depression is. And he understands that people can be so sad that sometimes they don't want to live. And that's age appropriate for him at this point. But as he continues to grow, we'll talk more and more about it, just to normalize it, keep the door open.
Yeah.
That's what I encourage parents to do.
Yeah. What about I like what you said about, I never heard anyone say that before. Just straight out ask their kid, do you feel like a boy? Which just it's interesting you said that because I'm sure you've heard or seen there's laws being passed where we can't talk about the don't say gay bill and all these different things.
Yes.
And then I also think that um what's the words I'm looking for? Like how you said talking, I think asking it, I don't think that I could probably ask many parents, have you ever asked your child, or they would say yes to the question, have you asked your child, do they feel like a boy or girl? Because
Sure.
I think most times, just from what I have heard or seen or read on TV or just being around, and I think just being around people, because it is a taboo subject, it's like, they're a kid. They don't know what they're talking about. Like, you're a boy, like, this is what boys do. You're a girl. This is what girls do. Like you don't know what you're talking about. You're young. So what is your response to that? Because when people say like kids don't know, they're just kids. They don't know.
Mhm. I think that I'm going to throw back to the word you used earlier, around the term you used earlier around our own conditional compliance.
Yeah.
How have we how have systems and all of the structures that are in place kept all of that down? Like,
Right.
if we go back centuries, there's always been fluidity in all things. And so, yet, in order to maintain a patriarchal structure, a white patriarchal structure, that throws waves and things. People don't want to hear that. They're like, so I think of kids can teach us so much
Yeah.
if we just listen. If we
Yeah.
just listen. So I'm not saying kids, parents should ask their 3-year-old if they feel like a boy or girl and then run out tomorrow and, do a transition surgery. I'm not suggesting that,
Right. Right.
but I am suggesting that it tells your kid that there's not anything you're afraid to talk about with them. That
Got it.
that no matter what, you're going to accept and love them. That they're people. They're people.
Yes.
And we think we know more as adults when really we're the ones that have been conditioned more than they have.
Yes, those are facts.
Facts, right?
It's so true because it's just like the last time I was around my one of my nephews, they're still young, but he was younger. And you just realize how free kids are. Like they're just so free. And you're
Yes.
just like, you know what? I'm not that free. I was just like, yeah, I'm not that free.
Right.
You know
I'm
what I
not that
mean?
free either. I would love
Yeah.
to. I attempt, and I do think one of the joys that I've had in my journey of motherhood has been to see the world through a kid's eyes again. And it's one of
Okay.
the things I love about working with kid clients. Like, I don't only want to work with children, but I love that it keeps me, I don't know, fresh. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't keep me stuck in, I'm a Gen Xer, and I think on the regular, Audra will tell me that, like, still can't believe you're Gen Xer. Like, and I think that
Yeah.
my generation and older, we and to be fair, I think it's again, it's conditioning, it's systemic thinking, it's all of the things,
Yeah.
but we think we're right. And it's like, what about all the people that are younger than us? Like, we didn't think that when we were young, right? We were like, what are these old fuddy-duddies thinking? Oh my God, I totally just aged myself right now. But like, I think youth have so much to teach us. And I think it's beautiful. I think
Yeah.
Gen Zers, millennials, whatever the next thing is going to be, because I don't know what that means, but
Yeah. Me either.
I just think there's so much that we can learn from them. I don't know. I think you're pretty awesome. They
They
know
are.
what's going on.
They really do. Yes, they do. I agree with you. And I definitely have, I think, realized over maybe these past 2 years. I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, but I feel like I'm older now looking at some of the stuff that like the youth is into. I'm like, I don't even know who some of these people are. Like
Yeah, right.
when they're talking about music, and I'm just like, I think this is the first time where I'm just like, I really am not in the loop with like the youth.
It happens. It does
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I was definitely in my mid-30s, mid to late 30s, I think.
Yeah.
And I remember my husband and I watching the Grammys and being like, I literally know like 4 people on here. I don't understand what I used to know all the things. I used to
Yes.
know what was in. I have no idea now, like
Yeah.
what happened. So,
Yeah.
and I think if we don't have, and this goes intergenerationally too, like, so not to be ageist, but like going both ways, like we need people of all diversity in our lives, including age. And if
Yes.
we don't, then we get stuck. Who wants that? No, not me.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. And that's been my thought over these past couple years. I'm like, I need to make sure I stay in touch with people who are younger than me, so that way I'm like not stuck in how I think,
Mhm.
because I've just always been used to being the younger person. But then I'm
Sure.
like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you
Yeah.
mean.
But then you're like,
Yeah,
oh, I'm not the younger person. And actually, actually people don't think that way anymore. So yeah.
that's that's right.
I,
I
I
get challenged all the time by younger people, and I love that. I think it's important and healthy.
definitely,
Keeps
I
us
agree.
curious. Keeps us curious.
Yes. Yes, that is the word of the day. Yes, we have to stay curious. Yeah, I agree. Before we get you out of here, and thank you so much. I could go on, but
Thank
I'm not
you.
going to. But I am going to go on. Um, just a few questions to help us to get to know our guests better. Just 4 questions. I don't have a name for this section yet, but I'm going to
Okay,
come up with
cool.
a name one day.
Love it.
So, keeping on brand with the name of the podcast, I wanted to know, what is something people might not know about you that you enjoy doing on your days off?
That they wouldn't know about me.
Yeah.
Let's see. It's a great question. I love it because it's making me think.
Yes. Think. Take your time.
Well, first thing about what I do, and it's like, but I think, catching up on sleep, um,
Yes.
running around doing a million things, sometimes vegging out. Maybe that's a thing that most people wouldn't guess, is that I think sometimes I share my own internal struggle here, is I'm either highly motivated, moving on one end of the spectrum, or I'm inert and not moving at all or doing anything at all. And so that, I think, is probably what most people would not guess about me when they talk to me or see me or know me out in the world, is that they would think that, like, oh, this person could be like horizontal on a couch and watch, hours of whatever it is that I'm going to be watching. So for
Because they're
sure.
used to seeing you like up and at it.
Yes, I think so.
Got it. Next question. When is the last time you changed your mind about something or someone?
Oh, hell. Yesterday, I don't know. Yeah, all the
I know we
time.
just talked about how you're so open to changing how you think. I'm like, I'm sure you have a list.
Literally, I think I really try to remain open. And sometimes it's hard, especially when people, um, the hardest thing for me is people who can't be open about their way of thinking. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I try to honor the pieces of their humanity that I do see. And I would say the last time was a couple of weeks ago, like for real in my life person, is a couple of weeks ago. Somebody showed me a glimmer of hope around. I come from a very white ass family, very rural upbringings, and very, they're going to not love this term, but very racist views. And I think they're not overt racist folks, but they are that, like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, Black people, and then fill in the sentence, whatever that looks like, right?
Yeah.
So, and we were talking about medical inequity with, I was talking about that recently with some people in my family. And there was a moment where I saw the person say, "Do you really think that happens?" And I was like, okay, there's a little tiny glimmer of hope. Like, it's tiny. It's a micro. It's like a pin of light. But I was like, yes, it happens all the time, every day, all day. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So they're like curious. They asked a question. So
They did.
you were
They
like,
did. So for me, that's like, sometimes I think people aren't, I do believe everyone's capable of change. I just think it's what is going to motivate them to change is often if it affects them.
yeah. I definitely can relate to being like you said, sometimes you think you're right and then you start talking to other people and it's like, no, that's not right actually. But you really believe in your heart that, like, no, this is the way.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
You're like, this is the way and this is right. And that's something I'm trying to work on now. For sure. Is
Same.
Yeah. It's like, no, I'm open. I am open. I'm open to listening and learning. And then it's just like, okay, maybe I wasn't open in that conversation.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Same.
yes. Okay. Two more questions.
Sure.
When is the last time you felt extremely uncomfortable or awkward? And how did you manage it or get through it?
Um, that's a great question too.
I like to ask people this because I'm like, I always feel awkward and I feel like I always do something that people just probably think I'm even more awkward in the end. But I'm like, I feel like I got through it, or did I just do some more awkward stuff?
I mean, I was gonna say like similar. Like I do feel, I don't know if awkward is the way I would describe it, but I feel like people don't always get me. Like they're like, and it's one of the things that I love about like when I have authentic relationships, and what I love about being a therapist is that building that trust and rapport where your client can go like, Jen, you are not making any kind of sense. And I'm like, okay, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Like, let me step it back. So I think I feel really vulnerable and awkward as a therapist.
Yeah.
Like, because there's no, it's, I would draw the parallel to probably what it's like interviewing, right? Where
Yeah.
you don't know what answer you're going to get. And
Right.
so you're like, well, who knows where we're going to go with that? I don't
Yeah. Like,
know.
where do I go next with that information?
Yes.
Yeah.
But so I got this tattoo a while ago and it says stumble bravely.
I
And
like that. I like that.
there is this, I'm going to totally forget her name at the moment. And I feel like I need to give her credit because it's her saying, she came up with a saying. Um, I'm going
That's a
to find
great saying.
it. But I try to think about how I can mess it up and feel and be awkward about how it's happening. Like even answering this
Mm-hmm.
question, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so awkward. How am I answering this question? But even
Yes.
so, I can stumble. I can be brave about stumbling and know that it's okay. Like I can be human and it's okay.
Right. Right. Definitely. I just read somewhere, I forget whose page it was on. I think it was on I'm having a brain fart. Her first name is Nedra, but she's a therapist as well. I think it's Nedra Webb. I can't remember. I don't want to mess her name up, but her first name is Nedra, and it said like a list of things, like things I'm learning to accept, and it was like 8 or 10 things, and one of them said that sometimes I say the wrong thing.
Yes.
And I said, you know what? Yes. Like sometimes I get so in my head because I'm like, I know that probably was not what I probably should have said, even though you're not saying it with like bad intentions. Looking back, you're like, I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But
Lisa Renee Hall is her name. I wanted to give her appropriate credit. She
okay.
is um, an author and she is a guide that I did her. She talks a lot about privilege and like understanding. She does she calls it the inner field trip for understanding your privilege and unpacking racism, your inner racism. So I want
Got
to
it.
give her full credit because mad props to her for
Yeah.
making me
I
stumble lately.
yes, I like that. I heard before that stumbling is still movement. And I was like, yeah, that's true.
That's right.
Yeah. It's
We
still movement.
that's right.
Okay, last question. Last question is, which maybe we kind of touched on this, I don't know, but when is the last time you learned something new? So it can be a skill, or maybe you learned a new piece of information.
Um, I think one of the things about me is that, and sometimes this is to a detriment, I will be clear about, is that like I am a learning machine. Like I love learning.
Yeah.
And sometimes that supervisors have challenged me on like slowing down. Like, what does all the learning, what's that about, Jen? What's happening for you that you need all this learning? Like, why are you feeling inadequate? Like, whatever the things are.
Yeah.
Um, but I think like an example is I took a training Friday. Like I had a 3-hour training on a type of intervention for therapy. And I had one the Friday before that, and I had some the month before that. And so like I really am, even if it's just listening to a podcast to learn something new or read something, like
Yeah.
I'm just excited about life, I think. And like it makes me want to know more and understand, I guess, know because I want to understand better. That's really what it comes down to.
Definitely, definitely. I can relate to that. I've been ordering tons of books, and my husband's like, okay, you need to like read some of the books you already have first. But I'm like, but I see these books and then I want to read them. I know I'm going to read them eventually.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure you can see I've read
Right.
a lot of these. I have not read all these books. I'm going to get through them, but we had to get more shelving because I kept ordering books. So I'm like,
Yes.
I need to stop for a while and
I have
actually
a
do.
similar problem, I will say. Like, and I will try to grad school read some of them, but like there's some that are really good you just want to like get into, and then others are a little too academic for me sometimes. And so then I just skim those guys. But yeah, knowledge is power, man, right?
It's true. Knowledge is power. That's a fact. I totally agree with that.
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Jenn. Please come back.
Thank you. I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful getting to know you a little bit and
Yes.
being here. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome back. Anyone from Alloy is welcome here anytime. And yeah, we always get tons of gems whenever you are on, stuff that we wouldn't have got if you aren't here. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. You can catch us every other Friday if you enjoyed our content. If you're watching, you can catch us on our YouTube page at On Our Days Off. If you're listening, you can catch us on listening platforms such as Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.